Morgen und willkommen zu unserer Live-Übertragung der wöchentlichen Show Tourismus Namibia. Mein Name ist Frank Steffen, ich bin der Redakteur des Tourismus-Namibia-Magazins und natürlich von der Allgemeinen Zeitung. Willkommen zur Show. Wir haben wieder einiges für Sie vorbereitet, wieder mehr so ein bisschen im Trott wie vorher. Wir haben einmal die Topics, also verschiedene Themen, dann haben wir Destinations, also Urlaubsideen. Und ganz am Ende habe ich dann nochmal ein Gespräch mit Rob Parker. Ich hoffe, das interessiert Sie. Als nächstes haben wir erstmal die Topics, aber wir gucken nochmal schnell, was wir an Werbung für Sie haben. Topics, unsere Hauptthemen diese Woche. Da habe ich so einige rausgesucht, die ich ganz interessant fand. Also als erstes und ganz wichtig, ich fand das ganz interessant, ein Peter James Nugent hatte auf Facebook ein Foto mit Masken und ja, es ist eigentlich tragisch und es ist typisch ein Zeichen der Zeit. Jetzt wehren wir uns gegen Covid und tatsächlich auch im Covid haben die Tiere wieder das Nachsehen. Also ich würde doch darum bitten, dass alle, die halt eine Maske wegschmeißen, sorgen, dass sie auch wirklich im Mülleimer landet. Denn es ist doch wirklich schade, dass es jetzt schon wieder Vögel gibt, die dadurch zu Schaden kommen. Ich meine, das ist ja einfach unnötig. Und ich verstehe das halt immer nicht, dass es immer noch Menschen gibt, die ihren Müll einfach nicht wegräumen können. Und schade halt. Und ich dachte, es wäre vielleicht die Mühe wert, nur mal kurz darüber zu sprechen. Dann haben wir als nächstes was Interessantes, Elefanten in Uis. Ganz interessant, das hatte in der Allgemeinen Zeitung, hatte Erwin Leuschner drüber geschrieben. Ja, die Elefanten lassen sich nicht aufhalten. Das ist ja nicht weit vom Brandberg, den sieht man da im Hintergrund. Und ja, die haben dann beschlossen, es wird mal Zeit, sich in Uis näher umzusehen. Ich fand das eigentlich ganz interessant und ich finde es auch schön, dass die Leute sich nicht dann gleich wieder beschweren, dass es zu einem Mensch-Tier-Konflikt kommt, sondern einfach das schön fanden, dass sie eben diesen hohen Besuch haben. Als nächstes haben wir ein Foto von Swakopmund, da vom Strand, gleich vorne an der Mole. Aber darum geht es in dem Fall weniger, das ist nur, um eben zu zeigen, da ist es sauber, aber wo es auch sauber werden soll, ist die Otto-Herrigel-Stiftung hat dazu aufgerufen, heute Morgen, also jetzt so eben am Samstagmorgen, das Kan- und Swakop-Revier zu säubern. Und da gibt es wohl auch Brötchen und alles Mögliche mit dazu. Und dann hatte die Lindy Barnard auch dazu aufgerufen, dass man den Strand entlang Meile 6 bis hoch nach Meile 14 auch mal säubert. Also wenn Sie Swakopmunder sind oder da im Urlaub sich befinden, jetzt wäre die Zeit, wahrscheinlich kurz dahin zu fahren und dann können Sie wahrscheinlich noch ein bisschen helfen. Ja, und dann zuletzt haben wir unseren Umweltminister, Pohamba Chifeta, der hat in dieser Woche seine neue Strategie bekannt gegeben. Es geht da um die Wilderei in der Hauptsache, hat auch aufgerufen, dass mehr getan wird, obwohl er sich eigentlich schon sehr zufrieden zeigte. Aber was ich einfach interessant fand, und deswegen habe ich diese ganzen Fotos hier rausgesucht, er gab so Zahlen bekannt. Und wenn man da überlegt, 2015 wurden noch 97 Rhino gewildert, also Nashörner, und 49 Elefanten. Und dann in dem Jahr darauf ging ja der große Aufschrei los, Da waren die Elefanten dabei mit 101 Elefanten, die gewildert wurden, 66 Nashörner. Das war die Zeit, wo er dann eben anfing, spezielle Kommandos auszubilden und Sonderabteilungen zu bilden. Und man muss den Minister lassen. Er hat da wirklich einiges geleistet, denn Wilderei kann man ja nun nicht grundsätzlich verhindern. Das ist ja wirklich nur die beste Mühe, die man sich halt gibt. Und 2020 sind tatsächlich nur 31 Nashörner und 11 Elefanten gewildert worden. Also ist eine immense Verbesserung. Er gab dann auch Zahlen zu den Schuppentieren, also lebend wurde nur eine verschwindend kleine Zahl eigentlich gefunden. Was eben das Problem ist, sind die Schuppen selber. Also die Pangolinenschuppen, das sind natürlich immer noch sehr begehrte Produkte in China. Basiert natürlich auf der verkehrten Überzeugung, dass man damit Stimulanzmittel herstellen kann und ich weiß nicht was für ein Kokolores, aber es ist, was es ist und ich finde es halt gut. Interessant war dabei auch Dirk Heinrich, der eine oder andere wird ihn kennen oder sich an ihn erinnern, brachte die Frage auf, was das Ministerium eigentlich also tut, damit auch Vögel also beschützt werden und nannte einige Beispiele, also mehrere Beispiele von Vögeln, die halt auch inzwischen sehr selten hier vorkommen und auch geschützt werden sollten. Und der Minister war dem nicht abgeneigt. Er meinte sofort, nee, das müsse auf jeden Fall getan werden. Und Kolga Sipoko, der Umweltkommissar, der war auch sofort dafür und konnte sogar hier und da ein paar Zahlen nennen. Das so am Rande, das war dann also die Themen der Woche. Als nächstes kommen wir zu Destinations mit Chloe Deer. Welcome back. As you can see, Chloe has joined me. Chloe Deer, who obviously writes for Tourismus-Namibia and also takes care of our Twitter account and all those funnies.
Instagram.
I say Twitter, I mean...
You say that all the time.
Yeah, I don't know, it must be some leftover from Mr. Trump. Anyway, this is the part of the show that I actually always enjoy most, simply because we introduce you to different destinations, obviously holiday ideas, and who doesn't like doing that?
Yeah, exactly.
So what have you brought for us?
Well, I just wanted to touch on Swakopmund a little bit because our Holiday in Action edition kind of revolved around Swakopmund, but we never really spoke about the town itself. And there is something, I mean, I fell in love with the buildings, and it's impossible not to really, but just going and taking the town by foot and literally just street by street, going past all of the buildings and really admiring the ancient architecture. I mean,
and actually feeling that you're in Germany.
You really do feel that, because even though some of the buildings or most of the buildings you're not able to enter into, the beauty of the exterior and the architecture is unlike anything that modern architecture can emulate. So it's whether it's the old school buildings, the railway station, the lighthouse, there's just so much to see.
This is actually the Verman house.
Yes, yes, and each one of them has a different history of its own.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if there is a map specifically. I'm sure there will be somewhere. But my best was just being able to like grab an ice cream and just literally explore each and every one of the buildings. They are dispersed all over the town because the whole town itself is just almost decorated in these Germanic buildings. But I can't think of anything better than spending an afternoon just walking and photographing. But I would have loved to, I mean, I know the history afterwards, but while I was there, I would love to have had a little bit more insight into, and unfortunately the church was closed when I was there, but apparently that's beautiful on the inside as well. But it just adds...
reminds one a bit of the German church in Lügritz.
Oh, okay. If it's similar in the inside. This, I mean, even this was absolutely beautiful.
This is the old station building.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, that's in the back you had the trains running in, and then they changed it over time because they didn't want that train noise in town all the time.
But I mean, even just the colors, I can't believe how well the architecture has stood the test of time.
And what I like, I must say, the Swakopmundas in that respect are just a special bunch. They really look after their...
I think in comparison to other towns that I've visited, there is, I mean, you can see that they've been repainted and renovated and looked after.
There's a huge amount of pride in keeping heritage sort of going.
I must agree. I didn't realize that, but I definitely, and just everything about the town is so charming, and so I can't recommend going there enough. I mean, obviously I can understand why it's such a huge holiday destination, but just as a weekend getaway, I mean, there's so much to do and experience.
There is really, because Swakopmund has over the years done lots of, this adrenaline sort of junky stuff, sandboarding and parachuting, and I know many a person that goes there and sort of does this where they take you on the back and then you paraglide with a person who knows what they're doing. Because I mean, let's face it, the average person will possibly do something like that. Because it's obviously a huge experience. But who of us really has the opportunity to go and paraglide or to jump out of an airplane that is functioning, by the way?
I know.
So I'm not the typical candidate for that, but I like that this sort of thing is offered because people are there who love that. And, so whether it's parachuting, paragliding, sandboarding, they've got these off-road bikes and all that. So
restaurants,
really it's great
I mean, there's something for everybody. And so while I tend to always gravitate towards wanting to understand the town from a historical or cultural perspective, there is something for the adrenaline junkie, for the adventurer. And so it is a brilliant destination in and of itself.
Totally agree.
And then I wanted to speak a little bit about Okakarara, which is a town that I absolutely fell in love with. In an upcoming edition, you'll read a little bit more about our Waterbach experience, but I spent a morning just immersing myself in the town and learning more about the Herero culture. But there isn't a town that I've visited in Namibia yet that is so proud of their culture. And this was on a day where all cultural museums were closed, mid-lockdown. And so everything that was happening was so authentic and real, which is what I absolutely loved so much about it. Each and every one of the people were so passionate about telling me about their dress and teaching me how they tie up their hairdresses, the perfume that they use. You can see in these beautiful bottles that all lines the streets, traditional food stands. And this is on a day where there were absolutely no tourists that were coming in and out, and this is and that's what I absolutely loved about it. And so because more often than not I feel that sometimes it's put on rather than being a kind of real authentic experience. And for me it was one of the most memorable experiences because I got to taste all the different roots that they use, and they were just eager to teach me. And I really love that, because I mean, and asking nothing in return other than just teaching me. This, you'll read about it in our story, but that's the lady Miriam who I ended up dropping off at a funeral later on. But we got on like a house on fire, and there wasn't space in the vehicle, so I just jumped into the back there to be able to take her. But learning about like questions that you couldn't just ask anybody off the street, about the number of petticoats they wear and the perfumes, and just really just learning about tradition outside of this like historical books or internet. It's great, and I think.
But I must say, the Ovaherero Traditional Authority, they're supported well by their people. Okakarara, I remember the first time I drove through there, must have been like 25 years ago or something, and what I remembered was it was a quaint little, it was really a little town, and what always sort of stuck in my brain in those years was there was a woman busy cleaning her yard with a broom. You know, obviously lots of the ground at Okakarara is very
fertile.
No, what you call that, red clay soil.
Yeah.
And so it gets very hard. So you could literally take a broom and actually clean it up. And that sort of stuck to my mind always. And then if you compare that to today's Okakarara, it's actually becoming a very modern little town, where they're doing a huge amount of effort to develop it and stimulate trade and so on. Because many Herero are at home in that area.
Is that the Herero capital, or is it difficult?
You can't really say it's a capital. It's one of their main centers. It's regarded possibly as a sort of unofficial capital, because Ochimbingo is also important. Opuvo is very important. So those are different sites, and obviously different clans of the tribe live in various areas. You know, that's the way it is, but it must certainly be regarded as one of the main sort of centers for them, because remember, for the Herero, the important center is really Okahandja. That's where they've got their traditional burial sites for all their big chiefs and so on. But yes, Okakarara should not be underestimated. Obviously close to Hamakari and you know, Waterberg, where obviously those huge battles took place. So it's an interesting place, and I've been there often since then. So, and I've always sort of felt welcome. There's no animosity, even if I'm German speaking.
No, not at all. I was I could go back there tomorrow. I wish I'd spent more time there. And it would be great to have visited one or two of the living museums, but they were all closed.
Yeah.
But I mean,
unfortunately, they're a bit dilapidated.
Really?
Yeah, because they're not properly used. One of the one right in the entrance of town is actually quite a nice one, and it sometimes saddens me to see that it's sort of gone down the drain a bit, because it started off so well. But I think the biggest problem is that up to now, the town lay off the sort of tracks that lead past, because it's still quite a way back in, even if you're close, you know, having stayed at Waterberg. Where I see these little towns getting some mileage is in future with this new tar road leading from Gebouwes up to Grootfontein. That obviously shortens the drive for many a person that wants to go north. And even if you just go to central north, then you would technically come past Okakarara as you go towards Ochivarongo. So yeah, it's a special place. No, I think they'll pick up. And then, like I said, the Herero are quite crafty in finding ideas on how to, crafty in this case in stimulating growth and getting new business ideas going.
But also, they're so proud of their culture. You almost don't need the living museums, because it's it's just they embody it in their daily life so much more than many of the other cultures in Namibia, which tend to be getting lost. There's for some
that one won't get lost. Don't you worry.
And then just something that I absolutely reveled in. I'd always heard about the lakes in Namibia and the aquifers and the sinkholes, but I actually just kind of snuck out of the Otjizonjupa region just quickly, just to have a look at what was going on there. And this is the old steam pump lake, otherwise known as Oshikoto Lake. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's so close to the main road, it's so worth stopping over.
Well, it's directly next to the main road.
100 meters, literally.
That much,
But it really is amazing. I mean, in World War I, you know, all the German troops threw their weapons into the lake.
It's not all. What happened is quite a strong contingent was still up there, because remember, the World War ended very soon for Namibia in those years, or German Southwest Africa, because it was already in July 1915, it was done and dusted. Because that's when the South African forces had come up to the height of Korab, which is like just outside Otavi. And obviously, because they didn't want to give up all their weaponry, they had literally chucked it in there.
A lot of it is in the Tsumeb Museum.
Yeah.
But experienced underwater divers can go and look at the underwater museum, which is apparently an incredible experience. But I mean, I've never been a diver.
It is actually. You had a couple of guys who actually did that years ago, and to illustrate the depth of the Oshikoto Lake, they literally put a diagram of the German church here in Windhoek and put next to it, just to illustrate the depth. And and that was the known depth, because they really can't go as far down as they would like.
And there speaks. This is the second, the
Guina Sea.
Which is a bit. This one you can swim at, and so I have to say that you can't swim at Oshikoto Lake, but there is just something so magical. I mean, this is the color of the water.
Yeah.
This isn't photoshopped or anything like that, and it's some people say that they're linked, but it's been proven that they aren't, or it's still being worked out.
At one stage, people were speculating about whether they sort of have an open channel and are interlinked, and that is not so. They are interlinked simply because it's the Karstfeld. The Karstfeld is very permeable, and it's funny enough, the Karstfeld actually goes like quite close to Otjiwarongo, but not right up to Otjiwarongo, but it still includes Ucho. Which is like further out to the west, obviously. But the Karstfeld is huge, and it obviously goes up to Grootfontein, and an immensely water-rich area.
Sure. I mean, you can see
so are they interconnected? Yes, but simply because of the water table that interconnects the whole Karstfeld.
But it really is unbelievable, and whether it's on your way to Etosha or coming home from Etosha, it really, I cannot recommend enough swimming in that water. It is warm. You wouldn't even believe how warm it is. And it's just like an experience not to be missed. I'd seen photographs previously and thought that the water could not be that blue, but you literally swim with tilapia nibbling at your toes. It's an unbelievable addition to any trip, I think.
The Guina Sea is obviously a bit off the track.
Yeah,
but you can also make
kilometers.
it interesting by simply going that route out, going through to the Guinas, and then sort of joining up to Otavi instead of going back to
exactly.
Tsumeb.
But I mean, it's not far off the track at all.
But when most people sort of feel, no, I'll stick to the main road, and that's what I do.
Do
and
it.
So they miss out on it.
No, don't miss out. It's so worth it. One day I'm going to go and explore Dragon's Breath. That's on my bucket
that
list.
one we need to do. I was trying for us to do that, but it's obviously on a private farm. So
exactly. We'll find a way.
Yeah, hopefully. But maybe they listen to this program and say, okay, if they want to write about it, let's do it.
Yeah.
Talking of that, we would much welcome you guys to send in videos, share them on Instagram. I almost said Twitter again. Share them on Instagram, follow us, even share them with us so that we can post them on Facebook. We want to tell you stories, and would really want people to know what you do. So please don't shy away, even if you only send us photos. That's fine too. We'll make a bit of a slideshow and post it on our Facebook site, Tourismus-Namibia. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this part. Yep. So I'll see you next week on this show.
Thank you.
Ja, und das war Chloe Dürr. Interessant, immer diese verschiedenen Ferienideen. Das Schöne bei Chloe ist, sie ist eigentlich ja nicht von Namibia und sieht manches ganz anders als wir. Und da fand ich das ganz toll, dass sie eben in Swakop doch sieht, wie so vieles eben immer wieder renoviert und in Ordnung gehalten wird. Und ich denke, da geht Swakopmund wohl ohne Zweifel als Beispiel voran in Namibia, was den Erhalt dieser Erbbauten anbetrifft. Also und sie hat im Prinzip recht, man weiß viel zu wenig über die Gebäude. Man sollte vielleicht mal gucken, ob man während ich mit dir sprach, kam mir die Idee, dass wir vielleicht mal so eine 2-3 Seiten Sammlung machen und in der Tourismus-Namibia veröffentlichen und einfach mal die Geschichte dazu geben. Warum nicht? Denn es ist ja wirklich wert zu erhalten. Dann haben wir als nächstes ein Gespräch mit Rob Parker. Ich hatte das vorher ja angekündigt. Rob Parker ist Kanadier, wohnt schon seit vielen Jahren hier in Namibia. Und der hatte mich vor einiger Zeit angerufen, als er gemerkt hat, dass die Allgemeine Zeitung recht viel über dieses Bohrvorkommen oder dieses Bohrvorhaben oben im Kavango geschrieben hat. Und da haben wir uns damals zum ersten Mal zusammengesetzt und ja, ich dachte, dass ich Ihnen die Gelegenheit gebe, auch mal so ein paar seiner Meinungen und Ideen zu hören. Welcome back. As you can see, I'm not alone in the studio any longer. Rob Parker, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So I invited Rob for the simple reason that we've obviously been all speaking about ReconAfrica and this new endeavor of theirs up in Kavango land, where they would like to explore or actually really extract oil and gas and whatever. And the biggest fear really is not only that oil rigs will be brought up there and the actual exploration process, but the way in which it is done. And the manner in which they apply their safety rules and their quality checks and so on. So we'll be speaking about that a bit, but first of all, in the beginning of the week, we had ReconAfrica for the first time sort of facing the public down in Windhoek. Up to now, they've had limited amounts of public meetings up in the north, and most people were not too impressed with the results, especially the manner in which they did their thing there. So coming to the point, Rob, what was your impression of that presentation up at Thule early on Monday?
Thank you, Frank. That was I and a lot of people waited with great anticipation to kind of see how Recon would be dealing with the public, the manner in which they'd be dealing, and kind of how open and transparent they were going to be, given the previous criticisms.
Yeah.
That there's been insufficient public consultation.
Yeah.
So I did watch with great interest, and I was somewhat disappointed by the tone that kind of came out straight from the beginning.
Yeah.
It was very hostile, and it didn't seem to me like these people were having a good time, like they wanted to be there.
Yeah.
You kind of got that vibe. There was a lot of this.
Very aggressive.
Yeah.
I remember getting up right in the beginning because Claire Priest, who was the one who led this whole thing, and then she presented it together with Dr. Sindila Mwiga. And so clearly they had their intention and wanted to sort of state their case. But I mean, I literally got up. I remember telling her, listen, this is not the way that you talk to us. I mean, we're all adults and we want to hear what you have to say, but not in this manner, because she was giving us a lesson about racism and stuff like that.
It was a bit rich,
Yeah.
coming probably from this oil company. What I noticed, is they're not there to kind of have a consultation. They're there to, they have some talking points that they really want to get out there, and they're really trying hard to control the narrative.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I feel like the public consultations are kind of a big inconvenience for them, right? And if you kind of look at their public relations and the way they've been doing things, you start to notice some very unusual things.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't the normal working of an oil and gas company.
And that's really what I felt, what I saw. Remember, when as a child you were accused of something and you knew you were wrong, you automatically come out aggressively. In German, they've got this saying that if you want to defend yourself, being aggressive and proactive is the best way of doing it, especially when you don't have a point to make. And this is how that whole system was to me. That whole talk came over to me, and what really came out of this whole presentation was that exactly what we'd feared. And we had, fortunate for us, we had a couple of real geologists there who knew their stuff. And they quickly pointed out that normally you first do a seismic test, and then you decide where to put your oil rig and start doing some exploration, by actually testing the ground and so on. And so what struck me was that Claire Priest was the only one who found that strange. And Dr. Mwia was really non-committal on that one, but clearly there were 3 geologists, and they were all on the same page on this one. You first do your seismic measurements and tests, and then you start drilling a hole into the ground. So that already showed to me that I think what happened in November was that they suddenly had to sort of put down facts. Mm-hmm. And that's they couldn't get that rig here fast enough, just to start, to make sure we're on the ground. Nobody can tell us not to come anymore. Right. And that's why they did it the wrong way around, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And having that kind of assessment done piecemeal, makes it harder to challenge. Makes there's less of the consultation than there should be. If you start to have a look online at the way the company is behaving, right? You start to see a lot of ads and a lot of paid ads and a lot of kind of very unusual activity, right? I've never really seen an oil company pay for ads before, and I've had a few investors kind of say the same thing. Yeah. And they've been censured already by the Toronto Stock Exchange. So there, as you said, there's a real kind of sense of urgency on their part to kind of plow forward, right, and move that process forward. And I think you saw that kind of sense of urgency in that interaction, with the community, right? Whereas it's, we're here to do this, and
make peace with it
and deal with it, essentially, right?
And this is really my biggest issue, and I think it's probably an issue which is shared by many. People tend to think, it's up in Kavango, it's far away. It's not that far away. Like I showed you earlier on that hydrological map, or actually on Google Maps, I showed you. The problem is that you've got this Kavango-Epukira basin, which literally reaches up to and actually even beyond Drundu, coming right down to Grootfontein, Otjiwarongo, and Gobabis. And I cannot stop stressing that issue. It's one big interlinked basin. And the problem is, we spoke about it earlier as well. If you think 3-4 years back, we had in Novemberland, we found that huge aquifer, and certainly everybody suddenly thought, finally our water problems are over. Until the voices of reason came in and said, yes, the water is there, and it's probably going to be some of the best water ever in Namibia. Yeah. But the problem is, if you drill now, because you've got all these various alluvial layers. And what happens is, if you drill through that, the saline solution, which is so typical of Etoshapan, for example, might quite easily get into that water. So when you've got a drilling operation in that area, you really need to be safe, and you need to make sure that you've got the proper casings, and you go forward with the right technology.
So, I mean, given that's the situation, and kind of looking at what the work Recon's done so far, you can see clearly that they're skipping steps, right? That they're not, they didn't line their drill mud pit. This is, kind of basic industry standards, international standards. I know that those are Canadian standards, and this is a Canadian company, right? So the fact that they feel like that they don't have to live up to that, and nobody's going to really scrutinize them, how do you feel that bodes for the water supply that you just talked about?
Yeah, well, that's a big thing, you know. If they drill in right down to 300 meters, and they've been saying so far, nobody knows whether it's true. Maybe they've gone further,
Right.
because they haven't been truthful about whatever they've been doing so far.
Right.
So if that saline solution runs down, let's say they don't have the casings in place that they should,
Yeah.
okay, or they allow water to go through to the bottom or whatever, then already we will have polluted water further down. And the problem
are you talking about Windhoek's water, Frank?
Not really Windhoek's water per se. I'm talking of the whole of Omaheke,
Right.
A large part of Otjozondjupa,
Right.
because that's all groundwater interconnected.
Right.
Okay, and as long as you don't have new water running through to actually sort of fill up those underground basins again, it will trickle towards a center somewhere.
Right.
And so that's just the way water does it.
Right.
And if there's polluted water on that side, it will start trickling into this water as well. So if you look at the basin, the Okavango-Epukira basin actually gets very close to the karst area.
Right.
And karst area is water that essentially can land up in Windhoek for the simple reason that they actually use the Omatako Canal
Right.
to bring water from that area.
Right.
The problem is that I'm not a specialist, so I can't really decide, is it what it is now? But neither are they.
Right.
And that's part of why they need to get the specialists in. I
what-
don't see that happening right now.
You know, if you look at the environmental impact assessment, you know, one of the crucial criticisms is that this thing is missing, you know, declaring where the water is going to come from, how much water is going to be used for the well, you know, and you know, it looks like that part was kind of deliberately left blank on the test paper.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it's because it's inconvenient for Recon to deal with that.
Yeah, and it's actually huge amounts of water. Now, we must always remember, there was this idea years ago to actually literally pump water out of the Kavango River down towards the Omatako Canal and then take it to Windhoek, because, I mean, that's the way you can sort of make sure that in the next drought, Windhoek would be safe.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why they're not allowed to do it is because internationally there's a law that says the last user of water is still entitled to receive X amount of water. So if you're one of the countries through which a river runs, you cannot solely make use of that water.
Right.
Typically, the Kavango starts up in Angola. They cannot alone decide to what extent they'll use that water.
Right.
They need to make sure that enough water runs through to Namibia, even though it's only that short stretch where the Kavango actually goes through.
Yeah.
But it ends up in the Kavango Delta.
Right.
So Botswana also has a say in this. And that's why you've got these various committees that actually look at the water flow and
Right.
make sure that this thing is handled the right way. So to me, it is just almost inconceivable how our ministries of environment and for that matter, agriculture and also mines and energy in this case, have not said, whoa, guys, let's first find out what will the impact be on this environment. I mean, I see UNESCO could basically convince them now to stop at Sudilos. At least that area is safe. But like I showed you earlier on the map, from Kaute over to Bushmanland, it's a mere 70 k's as the crow flies. That's just around the corner. And to now tell me, but it won't have an impact. No, it might not have the direct impact right now with a single rig doing its thing, possibly not even on 3.
Yeah.
But we know that they compare to the Texas Perm Basin, you know, the Midland Basin, and they say it's the exact same as you would have in the Kavango.
And
so fracking is the future there. It's the only way they can extract oil if there is oil.
Well, I mean, you know, that's the other kind of worrying thing is that there's a huge discrepancy between the things that they tell their investors for the purpose of their, for the purpose of raising money and you know, bumping up their stock price, and the difference between what they tell the Namibian public.
Yeah, because in this case they told us no fracking.
No fracking, right? But you know, in their investor presentations for 11 straight months, right? That's not a typo, right? From May 2019 until March 2020, on their investment plans, they said modern frac stimulations, i.e. fracking. So, it's disconcerting that, they've told investors fracking and the possibility of hundreds of wells.
Yeah.
And they're painting a different story, for the public in Namibia. They're painting a different story at their meetings, And I thought it was quite telling, when confronted directly and by some of the geologists in the room who said, you were originally sold this as an unconventional play, right? With a possible upside in conventional. And now you've completely changed your mind. And how did that happen? And at the end of the day, Claire Priest and they couldn't come out and say, we're not going to be fracking.
Yeah.
All they can do, and if you look at their press statements, they say, this is not the stage where fracking happens, hashtag no fracking, as if that was the question, what stage are you at?
Exactly.
The question is, do you intend to frack?
And
they've
that
been
I
quite
still
clear.
asked her specifically. I said, can you categorically say that you won't
That's
be
right.
fracking?
Yeah.
And then she came with this nonsense answer about she's not here in 60 years to actually tell us.
Yeah.
Well, they've told everybody, and the investors specifically, that there's enough oil for the next 25 years. So if no fracking is intended in those 25 years, then she should have told me, but she can't. Because she knows that's the natural progression of how they would go for the next step.
That's kind of the worrying part. If you had a company that just came in and said, look, this is our honest situation, and these are our honest goals, and then you could evaluate it on its merits.
Exactly.
But this is constantly shifting truth, and they're to an extent they're hiding behind the government and hiding behind their permits.
And it's actually quite funny how they, in some of their presentations, they are very adamant that this is a deal done and dusted, simply because, as they put it, the Namibian government is the owner of the land. I've got news for them. That land is communal land. And you try and get the government to suddenly decide to take away land as they would like everywhere. I mean, it would be really a tough government that takes that sort of decision and faces up to the next election. So I think the government has a bit to consider here, more than just the obvious. You're talking in terms of water supply up in the north. You're talking in terms of these guys have literally put their rig next to a Mahangu field, not caring a damn about what's going on there. And so this is the sort of thing, and this thing will have long-term political repercussions if the government is not aware of it.
I mean, I'd maybe like you to speak to possibly some of the fallout in possible bilateral relations between Namibia and Botswana. When this kind of thing floats downstream.
Especially with Kaza being there.
Right.
I mean, you've got the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Park, and it's not only Namibia or Botswana, it's even Angola, it is Zambia, it is Zimbabwe. Everybody is in that big, huge park where we've decided we'll look after our elephants and our buffalo and whatever. And to suddenly come and say, but this is not an ecologically sensitive area, so don't worry too much about it. I mean, it's nonsense. By the way, that I think we've said what we wanted to say, but I still wanted to just mention, Rob is not your typical environmentalist. I mean, that's not what you do.
Yeah.
It's just a case of you saw something that's not right, and that's why I actually wanted to invite you. He's a Canadian, so he has a good idea of what to expect in terms of standards and I would say how Canadian companies behave overseas.
Well, I mean, to me, to look at the kind of actions of this company, and then to try and square it with the agenda of the Trudeau government, their recent bills in terms of net zero emissions, and then you turn around and you allow this oil company to actually export your dirty technologies and bring them somewhere else. And And the question is, is this being counted in your net zero emissions? What your company does and that you're responsible for. So for me, I'm not an environmentalist. I've been in Namibia for a dozen years or so. You've never seen me on the television talking about the environment or anything like that. I'm usually talking about pyramid schemes.
Yeah.
But the reality is, this situation is so egregious. This company is so greedy that they're failing to live up to basic industry standards. They're, in my opinion, not being honest with Namibian people, right? That's the real
That's the biggest.
This is a Canadian company, and as a Canadian, I feel like I have a certain responsibility to say, don't trust those guys over there.
Yeah.
Right? Because they really haven't shown themselves to be trustworthy. And if you look at kind of the history, 60%, I think, of the world's mining companies are based in Canada, right? So Canadian companies have been accused previously of acting with impunity abroad, right? And the good kind of news is some of them have been actually held to account through litigation in Canadian courts, right? Nebsambi Araya was in Eritrea, right? And some of those Eritreans went to Canada and they sued that Canadian company and they won.
Yeah.
Right. So I hope that Recon investors are aware, that there are methods of holding this company accountable, even if they don't happen here.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important message today, that you can't tell one thing to an investor and tell people who indirectly foot the bill at the end of the day something different. Those two stories need to gel so that both of them have an exact idea of what they're letting themselves in for. And we currently feel that's not the case in
This company hasn't paid a bond, right? So, and they've incorporated a subsidiary, right? And what happens when the oil runs out or the money stops flowing?
Exactly.
Is a little subsidiary declares bankruptcy,
and gone
right?
now.
And they're gone. There's nobody you can hold responsible. They haven't paid a bond for cleanup, meaning the cleanup is on the Namibian taxpayer. In Canada, Justin Trudeau just signed something that cleans up after Canadian oil companies who don't clean up after themselves. 1.7 billion Canadian to go around capping wells. So this is what we see is that the private sector in the extractive industry has to be compelled to act right. You need a strong state to say, we're going to hold you accountable.
If you don't
right?
follow the rules.
If you don't follow the rules. And Namibia doesn't seem to be doing that right now, and it's tremendously worrying.
But they've got a conflict of interest themselves, because they've got a 10% share in that company.
Also.
And that's where the dirty work starts coming into. And I think that's why they're so totally convinced that the government will stand by them. But I've got news for them. A government at the end of the day is accountable to the people. So let's see where that goes.
Just kind of one last point on that 10%. If you're familiar with the Companies Act at all in Namibia, right? 10% is not a number that gets you at the table.
No,
right?
it's not a minority share.
Well,
it is a minority share, but not with voting rights.
That's right. You've got no say. That oil company, once they get that, they're gonna. You can see already. You can see it in their eyes. They're gonna do that. They're gonna view that as carte blanche to do in this country, which 5 years ago most of those guys couldn't have found on a map, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna do what they please.
Yeah. Yeah, and with that we come to the end of this talk. I literally invited Rob simply to have a different view to only mine, even though it's very parallel-minded almost. But I think all of us need to think well about this story. This is not only some faraway place up northeast of Namibia. It really is Namibia, and contrary to what Claire Priest reckoned, it's part of us. It's not only the Kavangos who decide.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Okay. See you. Gut, das war eben das Gespräch mit Rob Parker. Ist natürlich in Englisch, geht ja nicht anders. Der Mann ist Kanadier. Er hätte es wahrscheinlich auch in Französisch machen können, aber dann hätte er mich wieder nicht dabei gehabt. Wie dem auch sei, mir liegt ganz viel an diesem Thema. Und zwar, wie ich schon in dem Gespräch auch sagte, es ist wirklich so, es gibt Leute unter uns, die meinen, ach, das ist nun nicht ganz so wild. Es wäre doch mal ganz schön, wenn wir auch ein bisschen Geld verdienen. Das ist ja auch so. Aber dann wäre es schön, wenn wir eine Firma haben, die tatsächlich transparent das Ding vorlegt, ihre Studien gemäß den Regeln ausführt und bekannt macht, mit uns als Leuten das Gespräch führt, damit wir ein Recht haben mitzusprechen. Denn ob wir es glauben oder nicht, diese Wasserbecken in Namibia sind riesig und sind unterirdisch und müssen geschützt werden. Wasser ist unser Problem, das ist unser aller Problem in Zukunft. So, ich denke, das gehört einfach dazu, dass das ein bisschen besser und offener gehandhabt wird und das mit Fracking schon mal gar nicht geht. Das wäre es für heute. Wir sehen uns in einer Woche wieder. Bis dann, bleiben Sie gesund.